and welcome to Film Independent Presents Virtual Edition. I'm Rachel Bleemer, Director of Events for Film Independent. Before we get started, I have to give some praise to our supporters. Thank you to our incredible lead sponsor, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, and our screening partner, Vision Media. For those of you watching live today, please take advantage of the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. We will take some audience questions towards the end of this wonderful Q&A. I'm honored to introduce our guest moderator today. Please welcome the president of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, Claudia Puig. Claudia, please take it from here.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm so thrilled to be here today with the director, Kevin Macdonald, and the wonderful actor, Jodie Foster. We're waiting for Tahar Rahim, who will pop in, but in the meantime, we'll get started. Thank you so much for telling this compelling, important, and ultimately inspiring true story. I was very moved by it. Kevin, I want to start with you. You've been drawn to hard-hitting and controversial political tales. You've made Last King of Scotland, One Day in September. You've done documentaries and narrative features. What was it about this story that moved you and motivated you to adapt Muhammadu Salahi's book?
Well, this very simple answer was that I spoke to Muhammadu. I read his book. I was sent it by Benedict Cumberbatch's company. Benedict had optioned the book. And I read it and I thought this is an amazing feat. It was written inside of the prison, the only book that was written and smuggled out. And I kind of thought, well, I'm not sure how you tell this as a film. I don't really know what the film is. And then they said, just speak to Muhammadu. And I did. And he is such a remarkable person. He's so warm and funny and teasing. He'll always sort of tease you once he gets to know you a bit. He just captivated me. And particularly, I was struck by his incredible superhuman ability to empathize with other people, and that he even is able to empathize with the people who mistreated him. To put himself into their shoes and ask, wonder why they did that, wonder what their upbringing was. And that sort of ability is extraordinary. And ultimately, of course, like at the end of the film, we see that he has forgiven those who did this to him. So it is an inspiring story.
That's an amazing capacity. We don't see movies about forgiveness. Oh, Tahar, there he is. Yay. We see movies about vengeance and revenge a lot, but we don't see about movies about forgiveness. So
and I think particularly, at this time of great divisions, not just great divisions in the US, obviously, but elsewhere in the world. Here in Britain, we've got our own divisions. To have a film where you see the two sides of the political spectrum actually coming together at the end and agreeing, and both Benedict's character and Jodie's character are, decent people with great integrity. And I think that is, also important to me, that not making another film which is saying, oh, the Republicans are awful, oh, the Bush administration was awful. It's understanding this story on a human level. And as Muhammadu himself says, the basis for what went on at Guantanamo, the mistreatment, was fear. That America was frightened after 9/11, and all the guards were frightened of him. They all thought that he was Hannibal Lecter, and I always feel strange saying that with Jodie. But that's what they thought he was like. They were told, this prisoner is going to bite your face off, and everyone was terrified of him, and terrified of all the prisoners. And of course, I guess the movie is trying to, more than anything else, just humanize this prisoner.
Absolutely. Jodie, what drew you to playing the part of Nancy Hollander?
Well, so many things, Kevin, obviously, but this wonderful screenplay. The second that I read it, I felt like this was something that I needed to do, and especially in service of Muhammadu's story. I think that's probably why we're all here, why we all found our way here, was that we were so captivated by him, and wondered how that's possible, that somebody who's subjected to fear and terror, instead of becoming a revenge seeker like the government did in 9/11, after 9/11, that he took that fear and terror and turned it into, love and humanity and forgiveness and joy. That is an amazing feat that we can all learn from.
Absolutely. Tahar, welcome. It's good to see you.
Hi. Sorry, I had a technical problem. I'm sorry.
No problem. I understand. So did you meet Muhammadu and spend time with him when researching for your part?
Of course, we started to talk thanks to Skype before, yes, of course, we talked a lot, and I'd like to meet him. And I remember I came up with some acting questions, and the more we would talk, and the less I wanted to ask him questions, because I felt like I was meeting someone extraordinary, and you don't meet great people quite often in life. So I wanted just to take advantage of him, and it was the best way to catch his spirit, just to listen to him and trying to observe and take something out of him. And when we really met, like for real, it was when he came for the first time, and he came in South Africa for the first time, but it was the first time he could travel after he got released from Guantanamo. And we just bumped into each other when I was going on set. And we hugged like as if we knew each other for, I don't know, years. And I felt really happy about it, happy for him and for me as well.
That's amazing. Kevin, I read somewhere that he learned to speak English by watching The Big Lebowski. Is that true?
Well, that's a kind of a good kind of slightly apocryphal version of it. But yeah, he learned to speak English. He didn't speak really any English at all when he arrived in Guantanamo in 2002. And now when you speak to him, you know, he's the most articulate. I mean, I should say he's an incredibly intelligent man. He speaks 7 languages fluently, and he's incredibly curious. And he learned his English from his guards. So, you know, he's got a very blue vocabulary and a very casual, because, you know, he's learned it from 21-year-old Marine guards. But also after the events that are depicted in the film, he was, after he had supposedly cooperated and confessed, he was allowed special privileges. He was moved into a separate part of the prison where he couldn't come into contact with any other prisoners. And it was kind of like a black site within Guantanamo. And he was allowed to have a DVD player, and the guards would bring him DVDs. So he's watched every American movie, you know, between about 2001 to 2016 when he got out of there. And because he had nothing else to do, he'd watch them again and again and again, particularly the ones he loved. Funnily enough, you know, the only film he knew of Jodie's before he met her was Maverick. And he knows Maverick back to front. And but his personal favorite was The Big Lebowski. And he watched it 86 times, he says. He knows every line by heart. And that's why at the end of the movie, you've got the Man in Me, the Bob Dylan song, which is from The Big Lebowski. And so it's a little nod to the importance of that film to him.
That's fascinating. Jodie, what's it like to play somebody? You've often played fictional characters. What's it like to play a real person?
Yeah, I've really resisted playing real people. I don't love biopics. I'm just not a huge fan of them. I feel I find myself limited by them, you know, telling a chronological story about somebody who was born and then they died, and weren't they wonderful? I really value the text. And so I've kind of shied away from biopics. I've only done one movie where I played a real person, but she had been dead for a couple hundred years, so I could take some liberties. With Nancy, you know, there are some liberties taken. I mean, yes, I look like her, right? I have the red nail polish and the lipstick, and, you know, Nancy's like a weird contradiction. She likes to shop and she likes to, you know, drive race cars and crazy things like that. But I did push a little bit her toughness and her defendedness because, so yes, I play a much less polite character than Nancy.
I think you play the version of Nancy that Muhammadu talked about. Actually, that's sort of where it was sort of his version of what she was like. That she was always the one who distrusted him. She was really tough. She was only interested in, you know, doing the right thing by the Constitution, not interested in him as a person. I think that was probably not who Nancy really was. But
yeah, well, since we lost
contact, he saw her for a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you do when you make films. You are usually charting how a character changes, you know, how they start off one way and whatever the journey is, how they eventually come to some kind of understanding. And that understanding usually mirrors how the audience changes as well. And in Nancy's case, that's very true. I think she came out thinking like, you know, is he guilty? It's possible he's guilty. Almost everybody I defend is guilty. And then eventually through the process of knowing Muhammadu and you know, learning his story, learning what happened to him, she grows to love him, which is the true story. She really does. Muhammadu and Nancy are like an old married couple. Very cute.
So
I love
true.
Tahar, one of the things I found really moving was that despite everything he endures, he has this ability to smile and stay light. And we talked about, you know, his sense of humor and his salty language. You know, you played him so well in that way. Was that something you picked up from Skyping with him? Was that, tell us a little bit about that choice.
Yes, I got struck by his ability to smile this way. The first time I met him, I could hardly believe he's been through this. You know, I was like, wow, how is that possible to be through to have lived what he's lived and to come out and be smiling and as if nothing happened? I was like, okay, I have a lesson to take from this man. I like to smile, like, because I like to see the best side, the brightest side of life usually. But smiling like him, I mean, he's the only one who could do it. So yeah, I took it out. I took it from him. Yeah,
That's amazing.
and he's always cracking jokes, and you know, he's such a good man. Really, each time he wants you to feel good, and he likes to put himself on the side, even if he, you know, even if he's been through this. You know, I was really impressed, and that's why I wanted to give my all to do him justice. You know, he deserves it.
Well, it was a wonderful performance. Both of your performances were amazing.
Thank you.
Kevin, I wanted to ask you, as you know, you have such a rich background in documentary filmmaking. Do you think that that experience, that sensibility, helped you to make this story?
Yeah, I think so. I think I always come at every story from the point of view of, you know, what's the reality? What did this place really look like? You know, where did they really sit? Where did, you know, what were the lines that they really said? And then I move away from that and fictionalize it. But I probably could only start, I think, I'm probably incapable of doing something that's completely, I'm not sure if I could do a Star Wars movie or something like that. You know, I wouldn't know where to begin. There's no research you can do. There's definitely the beginning part of everything for me. But obviously you have to liberate yourself from the facts. Otherwise, you know, you have to find a way to make a story, make a narrative, make something that exists within a 2-hour time frame. And that involves compressing things, simplifying things, combining characters. So Shailene Woodley's character, for instance, in the film, there is the real Terry Duncan, who we see at the end of the film, but actually she only joined the case 6 months into it. She wasn't there at the first meeting. So there was another lawyer there with Nancy. And so we combined those two characters. And you sort of slowly realize, well, in order to build up a story that works within a film, you know, you have to be a little flexible. But where the part where Muhammadu was very concerned that we be accurate was around, what does Guantanamo look like? What does it feel like? What do the guards say? How do they act? Because he said to me, you know, the American government spent millions of dollars keeping all of that secret, keeping everyone away from that, not letting you know, there are no films from inside there. There's no official pictures. There's a few pictures on the internet that come from guards who've surreptitiously taken them. But he spent a lot of time drawing out what his cell looked like, what the pathways looked like, describing the colors, painting in the colors for us, and showing it. So he said, I want it to feel like, you know, you really are there, and that the world can see what they were not allowed to see. He would even actually, I've got some amazing videos that he did for me the first time I actually went to visit him physically, where he kind of showed me using his body how long and how wide the cells were, all the positions he could adopt, so, you know, he really did get very, very involved in the detail of what happened in Guantanamo, including what happened in the mistreatment during the torture period. You know, although he's found that very hard to watch, of course, it is a representation, hopefully not too severe, but hopefully it's a fair representation of what he went through.
I wanted to ask you about that. You know, how difficult were those scenes for both of you, Kevin and Tahar, to film and then to be in?
You want to start, Kevin? Or okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah. Of course, I was thinking about it like since day one, since I read the script. I was like, okay, how am I gonna do it? How am I gonna do it? And when I talked with Muhammadu, I think I asked him 1 or 2 questions, and suddenly he started to change physically. he would become more darker, as if I was bringing him in back there. So I felt embarrassed and ridiculous. I didn't want to ask him more questions about it. You could see and feel, even through the screen, the trauma, and I felt bad. I was like, who am I to do this? So I stopped, and I needed to find another way. So we talked with Kevin about it a lot, and I watched a lot of documentaries, especially one that helped me a lot. It was in England. I don't know if you've seen it, Kevin. It's a bunch of guards who knew how to do what happened in Guantanamo, and there were 5 or 6 people, volunteers, who wanted to try the experience,
Mm.
and they did for days, and you could see them being broken, and it was very interesting. Some of them were very strong, but when it comes to humiliation, they would collapse. So it was very helpful. But above all, I think I needed to come as close as possible to the real conditions of Muhammadu, what he's been through, just to have a taste of it and feel it, so I could bring more authenticity to the audience, to Kevin, and out of respect to Muhammadu as well. So yeah, we have our little tricks as actors. So I wore rail shackles. I wanted to feel the cold, the waterboarding, and it was a good experience, I guess, even if it was very hard to do. But I was not in danger. Kevin was here, a bit worried.
I did get quite worried about him at times, because that was the last part of the filming, or last part of the main filming that we did. We went to Mauritania after that, a week or two later, but the last part of the main filming was doing the torture sequence. And of course, the crew are all tired by that stage anyway. You're at the end of the production, and Tahar was tired. He'd done all the rest of it, and he hadn't been eating. He'd been on a very restricted diet, and for the week of the torture, he didn't really eat at all. And he insisted on wearing real shackles the whole time, and his feet were bleeding because those shackles, rub into your legs. So I was always a bit terrified that he was going to, he was going to get sick. And I think there's no doubt that just that exhaustion, that kind of that feeling of not having any nutrition, the coldness of the air conditioning in the places we were filming, which he wanted kept up, that physicality of it really made a difference. But I don't want to take away from, he's a brilliant actor, which you can see in every scene, not just in those scenes. And I think, what's great about what Tahar does, amongst many other things, is that you're never divorced from the human being. You always empathize with this person. And that was obviously a real challenge, and something I was very worried about. I think we were all worried about, will an audience accept to start to feel for an imprisoned Muslim terrorist, somebody who was accused of being one of the recruiters for 9/11. How do you get to a place where they start to feel for him and understand and empathize with what he's doing? And so that a lot of the movie was designed around that, and obviously Tahar's performance is the thing that really makes that real and authentic.
Thank you, Kevin. I got to thank Kevin for this, because even if I wasn't in the movie, I would have been really happy to see this movie, because it's very rare to see these characters depicted this way, and that this is one of the reason why I was dying to play as well. So thank you for that, Kevin. Really.
Thank you.
Jodie, I wanted to ask you, I was really intrigued by your character's interaction with the younger lawyer, Terry Duncan, played by Shailene Woodley. Because Nancy has this much more, she's very direct, she's very decisive, she's more seasoned, and she doesn't seem to have much patience for someone who's maybe a little less certain about the law and maybe a little more indecisive or hesitant. Tell me a little bit about the dynamic of their working relationship.
Yeah, as Kevin was saying, the Terry Duncan character is sort of a composite of Terry and another lawyer. And there was something really beautiful about and Muhammadu also talked about how different the two lawyers were, and that he had kind of like an emotional connection in some ways to Terry Duncan because she always seemed like she cared and she was sort of maternal, and then he's a little scared of Nancy because she was just, blunt talk and wanting to get to the facts. So we played that up a little bit more in terms of the characterizations, and there's something really painful and interesting about what lawyers go through, right? If you believe in the law and if you're on the mission the way that Nancy is, you believe that you uphold the rule of law and you are there to protect the Constitution and you defend people that possibly are guilty. Terry Duncan's character, played by Shailene Woodley, is very captivated by Muhammadu, and immediately is drawn into him, and then feels dumb because she realizes that there's a confession and maybe he did it and she hadn't anticipated that before, and it's just a very interesting thing that happens between those two characters, I think.
And it was interesting to see sort of the evolution of Nancy's character too, because she does come across in all those ways you just described her, and somehow by the end we feel she's a little bit more compassionate, maybe more vulnerable.
Yeah, as I was saying, we're always looking for characters to change. They start one way, and through the course of the movie, the experiences that they've had somehow move them in a different direction. I mean, we're always kind of looking to sort of chart that course. That's really why I had to have a disclaimer with Nancy Hollander, the real Nancy Hollander, and just say, like, look, it's possible that my character is going to be a little less polite than you and is going to be a little meaner than you in the beginning, to allow her the room to be able to grow and change via her connection with Muhammadu.
Sure. Kevin, you interweave multiple timelines throughout the story. You're cross-cutting between the past and the present. What made you decide to tell the story in this non-linear way?
Well, I don't think there was any other choice, and it seemed quite scary because obviously screenplays are meant to be simple and they're meant to be as straightforward a story as possible, and then you embellish it with the visuals, with the performance. In this case, it is a very complicated structure and much more complicated than anything else I've ever tried, and we always had to be super on the lookout for how we could indicate to the audience, this is the time frame you're in, and this is the character you're following at this moment, because you do have 3 different time frames, 3 different main characters you're following. So there's a lot going on, but it felt to me like we're not just telling Muhammadu's story, we're telling the story of America's relationship with this prisoner, and by extension, the whole of Guantanamo. And we're telling the story of the prosecution, the Republican prosecuting lawyer, and the progressive defense lawyer. And so trying, I guess, to broaden this out to say, this is about the attitude of a country as much as it is about this one individual. But also, of course, I needed to get people to watch this movie. And I think if it had just been a movie about Muhammadu, I think it would have been very, very difficult to attract an audience. And one of the reasons that we chose this kind of thriller structure for it, that we're not sure if he's innocent or guilty, and the way in through Nancy's eyes, is because that felt like a more familiar genre kind of trope to use, and a way to suck a mainstream audience in. And then about a third of the movie, they start to realize, or maybe they don't realize, hopefully, that actually it's not that movie. It's a movie where we discover and understand this character who is very alien to us, and who maybe on first glance we're not so willing to embrace. So it's a kind of it's a trick, and whether it's a trick in a film which is full of complex structure. So I hope we pulled that off. People have said to me they're never confused through it, but yeah.
No, I definitely pulled it off. Your film also plays with aspect ratios and film stock, particularly in those flashbacks. I got the sense of sort of claustrophobia and relentlessness. What was part of the thinking behind that?
Well, the 3 different stories are, the primary stories are Jodie's story, Benedict's story, and Tahar's story. And Tahar's story takes place in the present day and in the past. And we wanted to have a differentiation because Guantanamo, of course, looks the same today as it did 3 years before, whenever his beginning of his story there. And So we decided to go for this idea of going into a 4:3 aspect ratio, the old-fashioned Academy ratio, and shooting that in a way that felt like 16mm, adding grain to it, to really, hopefully subliminally with your audience, you don't want them to be too conscious of it, to say, to people know instantly, oh, that I'm in those flashbacks. I'm back in the story that he's writing in the diaries. Now I'm in that. So every time we're in the diary, we're in the Academy ratio. And then when we're in Jodie's world, we're in a widescreen, 235 widescreen, and we have a slightly different color palette than the color palette we have when we're with Benedict's character, to kind of separate them as well.
Interesting. Jodie, your character Nancy says, since when did we start locking people up without a trial in this country? And although, it's been 20 years since 9/11, and we certainly know something about Guantanamo, did you find yourself getting upset or angry as you were reading the script? Did it kind of really strike a chord? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, upset and angry for Muhammadu because we care about what happened to him and it's unjust. But if anything, I feel sad for us, for those of us that lived through 9/11 as Americans, and who lived through genuine fear and terror. But unfortunately, the government took that fear and terror and went on a revenge campaign and discarded our democracy, discarded our norms and traditions and institutions that we hold dear, like the Constitution, in order to lock up people illegally I guess it's illegal because it's not on American soil, lock them up in a different country so that they could do unspeakable things to them, and get away with it. And that's really sad. It's sad about our country. It's a dark time in history in the same way that, Jim Crow South after Reconstruction, or Trail of Tears, or, Japanese internment, imprisonment camps. It's a part of our history that we have to look at. And that part is hard because it's painful to have, I know the word in French, but I can't find it. To go back and say this is my part. It starts with an A. Accountability. Yeah, go back and look for our accountability. Our part in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Tahar, tell me, what was the hardest thing about playing Muhammadu? What was the most challenging aspect of your performance?
There's many things. We talked about the torture scenes, and it was not easy at all. But I kind of find my way to do it, to believe in what I was doing. But I think that one of the hardest things for me was to really understand how Muhammadu transformed anger into forgiveness and love and all of it. What was the connection in his head or heart to make it happen and to feel it? And the more I would talk to him, and the more I understood how to just do it, just to be sincere, generous, and honest. And the other thing, which is more technical, it was very hard to show how Muhammadu learned how to speak English step by step, to show the different steps, then to show him speaking English fluently, because we had to deconstruct something. Sometimes it's way much harder to deconstruct something almost know, than create something and learn something. So we had to go back and break the English and pretending to not understand anything and playing with 3 different languages at the same time. It was hard. I didn't know if I would be able to do it.
That sounds very challenging. Well, we have.
I noticed that these questions at the bottom.
Yes, I'm just getting to that. There are now 15 of them. They've been mounting as we've been talking. So let me get to those. You read my mind. Francesca Ferry says she watched this on Tuesday. It was incredible. Jodie, your performance was outstanding. Did you meet the attorney who you portrayed?
I did. I got to meet Nancy. She's amazing. She really is an American hero. And the good part is that she was able to come to set and participate and be there with Muhammadu. So yeah, it was a great experience with her.
Great. This is for both Kevin and Jodie. How do you approach portraying real life subjects that are still alive? I think we answered that a little bit, but Kevin, maybe you can.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the complexity of it is that you want to make them all happy with the way they're portrayed, and obviously, as we know, that's not always easy. And actually, they were all three of the main characters, so all four of the main characters. I include Terry Duncan too, the two lawyers, Nancy Hollander, Terry Duncan, Stuart Couch, and Muhammadu himself. They were all incredibly generous and flexible. There were moments of friction where, you know, Nancy didn't like something, or Couch didn't like it, but they were, for them, they were always the grown-ups in the room. They were always like, you know, the story is more important than an individual detail. And there were, you know, that's but there's a lot of negotiation and discussion, and obviously you want them to be happy with it. And we're trying to, you know, there are no villains in this film. The villain is the system, but each individual main character actually has their reasons and is somebody who we can sympathize with. So, you know, I wanted them to be likable. But on the other hand, you know, when you're telling somebody's story in a very short space of time, you have to simplify so much that sometimes it can be unrecognizable to the person in question. But they all love the movie, which is great. Muhammadu absolutely loves it. Yeah, as do the others, and that's really, really gratifying.
Absolutely. Oh, let's see. Bobby says that he loved the film, absolutely loved the film, and he says, he asks, were you permitted special access to classified documents or information during production?
No, we weren't, but it wasn't necessary to have that because, of course, we had access to Stuart Couch, who was able to talk to us. He wasn't able to show his documents, but talk to us, and he's a very fine legal mind about what went on. And also, Nancy, you know, still has all her documents. Again, a lot of them are still classified, and there are things that she still couldn't tell us about. But yeah, we had access to the people, and through them, that was more information than we actually needed. It was so much information.
RS wants to know, how tough was this story to pitch to financiers and producers, especially considering this is not the sort of story that American producers might flock to?
Well, I have to pay credit to Benedict Cumberbatch and his company, who got behind this to begin with. And then, you know, BBC Films and 30 West and Topic, who were the two American companies who put up the bulk of the finance. And they were, you know, really, really brave, I think, in a way, to get behind the movie and to believe in it. And obviously, you know, I had an incredible cast who bring a huge amount of recognition and therefore financial pool with them. You know, luckily, I was able to get this incredible cast. I think if I had been a lot of unknowns, we wouldn't have been able to make this movie.
Yeah, just because of the audience. I mean, what's interesting is that the producers were brave enough to say, we're not going to get an American distributor before we start shooting, because we don't want them to tell us what to do and tell us to be afraid of the government and to have there be any censorship before the film is made. So STX has come in and distributed the film after the fact, and that's always a wonderful position to be in when you don't have to be, you know, getting that money ahead of time to start shooting.
Mm.
And I'm sure you know that firsthand from your experiences directing as well.
Yeah, directing and producing. You know, I always say it isn't, whenever a friend of mine does a movie, I call them the day before the movie's released and I say, congratulations, you made a movie and you got it all. That is an amazing thing, right? The rest of it is whatever it is, but the to be actually able to make a movie is a miracle.
Yeah. When you think of everything that's involved, absolutely. Let's see, the same person that asked the last question wants to know how long the writing and rewriting process was. I know you had several writers on the project, Kevin.
Yeah, it took a while. There were several writers, and I would imagine it was probably about a year and a half, something like that. And but as with a lot of movies, when the cast became involved, they contributed greatly. Particularly Jodie had a lot of input into her role and was incredibly helpful in other parts of the script as well. So it was constantly evolving. I really subscribe to the sort of the cliched line about writing movies that they're written 3 times: once when you write the script, once when you shoot it, and once when you edit it. And I think that is totally true.
Yes. Matt Brown would like to say that Jodie and Tahar are so terrific in the movie, and he wants to know if either of you had any previous knowledge about this specific story.
Did you say Mac Brown?
Matt Brown.
Oh, Matt. Okay.
Did you plant somebody in the audience there named Matt?
You do what you do to make a movie beautiful, and everybody, 175 people come together, if not more, come together to just create this thing. And you create this organism that, like a little baby, and it walks and talks the way it walks and talks. And Kevin spends years of his life hopefully improving. I mean, your work is never done until the movie is handed off to for prints to be made, although they don't even do that anymore.
So were either of you familiar with the story beforehand, or did you go into it you learned about it as you made the film or as you read the script?
You to Harvard, I knew nothing about this time in history, which is really sad for an American to not know anything about Guantanamo. And I think that's why really it just took me one read of the script to say yes.
Yeah, I never heard about this story before, except what we knew about what was happening in Guantanamo, because this was already out. But I mean, it's just, you see this on the news, you're like horrified and you don't like that, whatever. But when you read that story about Muhammadu, about what's happening really there, about his lawyer, the way they fought for him, this relationship that has been created with them, it was like completely new to me, because each time you see something about Guantanamo or a jail, you don't know what exactly is happening behind the big doors. And you can't imagine that something very human can happen between people over there. And yeah, it was completely new for me. Never heard about it before.
Barry D'Agostino says Jodie, oops, just disappeared. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, there it is. It says that you don't do a huge number of projects, and I think he means acting projects. Are you at a point where you're only going to do projects that you're very passionate about?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely there. Yeah, and I'm not sure. I think I've always really only done movies that I loved. I think when I was younger, I loved a lot more, and as I've gotten older, I think I've gotten even pickier. I do direct quite a bit, and so that really is my priority now. And I never know what I'm going to be moved by. It needs to be meaningful for me, and that doesn't mean it needs to be a political movie about an event in history. I mean, sometimes you can do a comedy that feels meaningful to you, and where you learn a lot, not just about yourself, but about the world. And yeah, I know that's a kind of a privileged thing to be able to do, but I do give everything. So I like to be able to know that what I'm doing is meaningful.
You're directing a film that I loved, an Icelandic movie, Woman at War.
Well, not many people are doing anything right now. So
right.
None of us are doing anything right now.
We'll
see what happens with that project, but it is a wonderful film.
I hope you get to do it. Kumkum Bhavnani says, outstanding film, thank you. Let's see. Muhammadu did want peace and love for his mom, but he was also very, very angry. He knew it was unjust. Tahar, playing him in counterpoint to Nancy and Kevin's direction, managed to bring that together so that audiences couldn't only say forgiveness is best. So it's an interesting, I guess he's talking about bringing it all together. And then he said, really brilliant acting from Mr. Rahim. And another person who's an anonymous attendee wants to know, what was the hardest scene to film, Tahar? I think we kind of went over that, but do you want to answer that again?
I might have a moment, yeah. Physically, I think I collapsed after a scene we did just one take. Remember that moment when he hallucinate and sees his mom, and we were meant to shoot it on Monday, and then we couldn't. So it was postponed, and I needed to keep it inside of myself. And at some point, I couldn't keep it anymore. And we on Wednesday, for example, we did it, and I remember I went to Kevin and I said, "Listen, Kevin, I can do it only once because I'm almost dead." Remember? And then I collapsed.
Very
I was
well.
like, almost the last day was second to last day, I guess, of shooting. Yeah.
And you hadn't eaten for like 2 weeks at that stage. Yeah.
Wow.
And you invited me in a great restaurant, and I got
Yeah,
crazy that night, like eating everything. I tasted everything.
But that tasted good.
Very good. Very good.
Kevin, Brian McQuarrie wants to know how much of the structure of the final film was in the shooting script and how much did you discover through the editing process?
90% of it was in the shooting script. All the flashbacks were there, the multiple layers of flashbacks. Obviously, there's some bits where we moved things around, to shift where we go to Benedict's story, where we go to Jodie's story. There's a little bit of shifting around, so it's not an exact match up to the screenplay, but structurally it's pretty similar.
Alva wants to know, everyone starts off by saying fantastic achievement, thank you, so I'm going to repeat those. It's always nice to hear. Jodie, now that you did this amazing performance, would you consider, I think they said in a doc, I think they were thinking docudrama. Would you consider doing biopics, I guess, since you talked about not particularly being drawn to them?
I'm not that into them. I mean, I'm not that into them. I think mostly because of the way they're structured, where every part of someone's life is just as important as the others. I mean, I really like the creative process of, looking at a piece of material and then breaking it down and saying, like, how can we tell this and how can we reimagine this and how can we change this? I sort of like the freedom of that, to be able to have one big, beautiful idea that you are moving towards and that you craft. And sometimes people's lives just don't cooperate with that. So I don't know how often I'll do biopics.
Okay. Tara Krieger wants to know if Marseille was a real character or a composite of several different recollections. Good question.
He is a composite of several different people. There was one man in particular who Muhammadu met through the bars like this. He never saw him, and they spoke French to each other, and they got to know each other quite well. And then it was one day he looked out of his cell and he realized that this man was, he had imagined him, I think, as this sort of debonair Parisian, and he actually turned out to be from West Africa like him. And he was a black man from West Africa, and he just spoke very refined French. And that was the kind of the model for this. But the relationship there is obviously dramatized, fictionalized around that.
To remember, Muhammadu didn't see another person for the first 7 years. He only saw guards. He was not able to see anybody for the first 7 years. He was isolated for 7 years.
That leads right into this next question from Michael Revoir. He says, how did the guy not go insane?
Well, that's a good question, but I think, strength is incredible strength of character, but also, there's a beautiful story that was kind of outside the purview of our movie, that after the torture took place and he was on his own, but he had guards who were, somewhat nicer to him because he had done the right thing, they thought, by confessing. And he befriended one of these guards called Steve, who is represented in the film in a small way. There's this guard who's friendly with him and tells him what happens to Marseille. But in reality, that friendship continued and they became very close. And in fact, the real Steve went last year to Mauritania on holiday to visit Muhammadu, and they're really great friends. So that's a beautiful story. And there's a little documentary actually that's been made called My Brother's Keeper, which you should look out for. It's coming out at the same time as our movie. Actually, it's going to be on the Guardian website.
Oh, great! We'll look out for that. This next question is from Sheldon Chow. He says, Kevin, can you talk about the cinematography in the film and how it was working with Alwyn Alvin, I guess it's Kukler. Yeah. And what was your shot planning process? He wants to know.
Well, Alvin and I are old friends. We'd worked together a couple of times on documentaries. We'd never made a drama together before. But he, you know, I've known him for 20 something years, and I happened to be in LA about a year before we made this film. And he said, "What are you doing?" He lives in LA now. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm trying to make this film based on Guantanamo Diary." And he said, "Oh my God, I'm listening to that book on tape right now in my car." And so from that moment, it was obvious he had to be the one to do it. And he's an amazingly lovely person, but also a real artist. And he is always thinking about the visual communication in the film at every moment, and prioritizing the performance and the emotional communication at the expense of making, you know, beautiful shots for beautiful shots' sake. And he was a great collaborator. We discussed a lot of things like the ratio and the use of grain, the use of light, way before we started shooting. So a lot of those creative conversations were had in advance, because he was on board for so long, and the film was up and down before it actually happened. And we you know, we do a little bit of shot listing beforehand. We would go through the sets and, you know, discuss things. He's German and very organized, as you would expect for a German cinematographer. And I'm, you know, British and really disorganized and don't like planning things. I like, in a documentary, in a way, just to see what happens and live in the moment. But I think that was a great combo, certainly for me, to have someone who was more disciplined than I was, who would make me sit down and go, "Okay, what are we doing next week on this? How are we going to do this?" So I would have to come up with answers there and then, but then we also had the freedom to improvise.
And how much improvisational, how much of the improvisation actually occurred then?
Well, it depends really on the scenes. Obviously, the scenes with Jodie and Tahar in the cell, for instance, there's not much improvisation you can do except for verbal. You can't really move anywhere because it's a tiny space. But with some of the scenes, particularly the torture scenes, or the scenes with Tahar on his own in the cell, you know, Tahar loves to play with the scene and do it many different ways, and that was a real joy for Alvin Kukler and I, you know, to watch him try things out. And he's not afraid of making a fool of himself and making a mistake. I mean, he usually doesn't, but you know, you have to be not afraid to be able to do that. And so that was a lot of fun, and a lot of discoveries came out of that improvisational attitude.
Yeah, and plus, also, sorry, I wanted to add something. When we shot the wedding scene as well, Kevin, he was all over the places, and I remember we had fun this day, because sometimes I was on frame and sometimes not, and I would play with him and talk to him to his ear, and like, "Look at this little girl, she's dancing, it's beautiful, just shoot her." And he was going here and there. He loved it. It was a mess, you know. People all over the places. That was great.
Yeah.
And that was actually shot in Mauritania, right?
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
in Mauritania right at the end for a few days. We were there for a week or so, and that was a lot of Muhammadu's real family at that wedding at the beginning. The real niece who did get married 20 years ago, whose wedding he was at when he was arrested, that she was there. You know, so it was a beautiful coming together of the whole family, who helped us make it. You know, there'd never been a film made in Mauritania before, I don't think, and there's no production facility or anything like that. It's you know, not a place where movies happen generally. So the family really helped everything work for us, and we could only shoot there because of Muhammadu's family making everything possible.
Full disclosure, I had to look up Mauritania because I wasn't exactly sure where it was. So
Well, I think most people aren't, you know, and I think that's one of the things I like about it as a title, is that it feels almost mythical. People have said to me, "Oh, is that, you know, the new Star Wars series?"
Mandalorian, Mauritania.
Yeah.
That's a great thing. If they think it's somewhere mythical, then this man is from this mythical place. But also, you know, maybe we'll get a few Star Wars fans buying it by mistake.
Hurts.
Something quite interesting about that, in terms of, you know, his rendition when he was basically kidnapped from his own country. You know, he's a Muslim man, but living in Africa. Like he himself in some ways was completely isolated from everything that was happening in the world in 9/11. And there's something really beautiful about that. I don't know about that title that really captivated me.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Speaking of Mauritania, Beth Brzezinski wants to know how many filming locations you had.
Well, we shot most of it in South Africa. We built sets. The Guantanamo, we had a set on the ocean front there, which was great, near Cape Town, yeah. And we filmed in downtown Cape Town for America, which you can do if you half close your eyes, and there's some very generic kind of American feeling streets and things. We were at one stage hoping to do some filming in the US itself, but with budgetary constraints that went away. And actually, when I got into the cutting room, I felt like I didn't really need it. I felt like it's an intense sort of chamber piece in those moments, so you don't need to have the extra stuff of actually being in the US. So yeah, it was filmed in South Africa completely, in Cape Town, and then a little bit in Mauritania.
Interesting. PJ Christie wants to know if there are any mechanisms in place to get this film seen by high school and college students. The film mentions the International Rescue Committee and the ACLU. She also wants to know if these groups have seen or endorsed the film. So 2 questions, I guess, there.
I don't know if the ACLU has seen it yet, but they are. If they haven't, they're going to very soon. Amnesty International are a partner in releasing the film. The Muslim American Council, I think they're called, are also a partner for us. They were very taken with the film and its representation of Islam and of this period. And so, yes, we've had a lot of support from those kinds of bodies. But the ACLU, Nancy Hollander works with them still a lot, and they were vital in Muhammadu's case. And so we want to do as much as we can for them and to bring awareness to what the amazing work that they do.
Michael Revoir asks, what genre would you call this movie?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think it fits any genre, and I think that's to me that's a good thing. I think for some people that might be challenging, but I think I think we said at the beginning of this, it starts off being a thriller, and that's sort of deliberate. I want to suck the audience in and make them feel like there's a mystery here, and is he innocent? Is he guilty? What happened? And then slowly you realize it's not that movie. It's actually a character study. It's about these 3 fascinating characters, and particularly about Muhammadu, and putting the audience into a position where they start to empathize with him, which maybe if we had just had Muhammad, if it had just been about Muhammadu, and if it had just been a drama set in Guantanamo, I think it would be a lot harder to get people into a position where they really were prepared to feel for this man.
Yes, Mario has a question for you, Jodie. He says he was interested in the makeup. Your lipstick is red. He has in capital letters, and it was red in capital letters. And the hair was so in place. And then he would notice Tahar's bruised feet. I guess he's thinking about makeup there too. He wanted to know if you actors have input as to how the makeup creates the character, or is that planned ahead of time?
Well, we all take part in that. I'm sure Muhammadu. I have a feeling that the bruises on Muhammadu's ankles were real, and they're probably doing more
shackles on them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the process. Is you add the details, whether it's the details of props or the details of sound. You're always adding all of the things in order to create this organism that is the movie. And makeup and hair is a part of that. I mean, that hair was not my hair. It was an incredible wig, and Nancy does wear that lipstick and those.
Interesting. Marcia Chan wanted to note how outstanding the cinematography is, and she also said sound seems so important. I always feel like sound is like the poor stepchild. Now, people don't mention as much as cinematography, but sound can make or break things, and it is so powerful. That's just me editorializing.
No, I agree completely. I remember once seeing Ridley Scott talking about his filmmaking process, and he said, who you think of as a very visual director, and he said, sound is 50% of a movie. And I agree with that. And I think it's one of the reasons why it's very hard to show people a rough cut of a film. Unless you're used to watching a rough cut, I think it's really difficult. Without that, the world building that the sound does, that takes you so much into the place, that works on your subconscious. So the sound team are here in the UK. the Glenn Fremantle and his company, who I worked with many times, and they're absolutely brilliant. They won an Oscar for Gravity. That's their famous film.
Great sound there too. I guess her question was, did you have any unique strategies in the use of sound?
Yes, but they're probably too detailed to talk about now. I don't know.
Okay.
Well,
With a couple minutes left.
well, we wanted Guantanamo to be this very bleak place, but it's by the seaside, which you don't think of as being bleak. So we sort of layered in all these sort of dragging wave sounds, as though a wave is going over fine pebbles and pulling back, and it's just something clawing about that and sort of slightly desperate. So every time you're exterior Guantanamo, you've got that, and then these very lonely winds. And we spent ages listening. I said, I want the loneliest wind. What's the loneliest wind you've got? And we got one from Bhutan or somewhere, and put it in there. And then obviously we use sound an awful lot in the torture sequences, where it becomes, the film becomes, unlike the rest of it, which is very talky. It's a legal drama with lots of talk, lots of hopefully intelligent, smart talk. But then you get to this section of 15 minutes where it becomes pretty much a visual experience, and a visual and sonic experience. And that took a long time to mix that section, to figure out how much music, how much effects, when do we go into the sound of Nancy Hollander and Stuart Couch, and when are we with Muhammadu? And figuring that sort of stuff out is very much sort of trial and error kind of thing. There was no great concept, but it's a lot of time, days and days spent finessing that.
Gary Meyer says it was great all around. Please discuss how you decided the intensity of the torture scenes. I think you just answered some of that. He said his wife had to walk out of the room midway.
Well, I'm sorry that she did. I think
All right.
it's very hard to get that balance right. Obviously, you want to take it to the point where people really understand what he went through, and the length of that is one of the important things. I would say that you don't actually see that much. You see someone being kicked and punched and some water poured in their face, and that's about it. And the rest of it is really suggestion and or the sort of sexual molestation. These things are sort of horrible thoughts, horrible ideas, but we're not necessarily seeing, I think we're probably seeing less actual violence than you would see in a Terminator movie or something. It's just so horrible because you've fallen in love with this character and you don't want to have to see this happen to him, and it feels real. But what our strategy was to try and take you inside his head, rather than in movies like the Torture Report movie that came out last year or the year before, or Zero Dark 30. We're always on the outside of somebody who's being tortured. It's objectified, and obviously by its very nature, this film is about an individual who we're going to empathize with. So we want to be inside his head, experiencing what it was like for him, which is our excuse to go away into these more surreal moments, these more sort of psychologically mixed up kind of moments. Yeah.
PJ Christie says the story is so well done. It's heartbreaking and important to see. He said seeing it right after The Dissident was difficult. I can only imagine. Wow. He said to please consider asking Miss Foster about the multicolored Post-it notes and what they represent.
Oh boy,
Eagle eyes.
Writing a movie.
That's just stuff I need to deal with. And it's better than having it on my desk if it's on the wall. Some of it are quotes, some things that I want to remember and find a place for, and some of them are addresses that I haven't put in my address book yet. And some of them are movies that I want to see. A list of movies that I want to see. Yeah,
what movies do you want to see? I'm interested.
The Hunt.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, people will call me up and be like, "Oh, you've got to see that movie," and then I write it down. Documentaries and things that that are on my queue.
All right. Well, I'll use this as the last question. I think we've almost covered everything here. Carlos Garza says, "Congratulations on a great film." To Kevin, what direction do you give to the composer, Tom Hodge, as to how the music should amplify aspects of the story or not?
Well, it was very hard to get the music right on this film. I went through several different composers before I found Tom. And I think the reason was because I didn't want a score that was going to just be emotive the whole time, but at the same time, I wanted at the right moments to amplify the emotion. And so I wanted a thematic score, but not a conventional kind of Hollywood symphonic thematic score. So, as with so many things in filmmaking, you know what you don't like, but it's very hard to describe, particularly with music, what it is that you do like. You know what works when you see it in the film. And so it took me a while, and I found Tom, who this is his first film, and he's a classical composer and has a kind of modern a modern classical band, I guess you'd call it, in Berlin. And he brought a tone to this that nobody else could. So yeah, I mean, hard to talk about music, isn't it?
You have to sing a bar.
Yeah.
Is it really a gift shop? Someone wants to know. That is an interesting
There is
question.
a gift shop. That is not the gift shop, obviously, because we didn't film in Guantanamo, but there is, yes, indeed a gift shop there where people can buy mementos, hats, gloves,
Shot glasses.
scarves with the Guantanamo.
Oh, hula girls and
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's okay. Last one. Chris Hilsebeck says, just a thanks for the four of you taking the time to expand on this must-see film. Made this virtual Q&A feel similar to one from a festival screening. So that's very nice to hear.
That's very good to hear.
I have to thank you all so much. Kevin Macdonald, Tahar Rahim, Jodie Foster. This has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you so much for making this wonderful film.
cool.
Thank you.
Very much, Claudia. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.